5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go!
What's up, everybody? Welcome to another Carpe Lotus Live. Today we have a very special episode because we're talking about the cultural moment right now, Cyberpunk 2077. Today I'm joined not only by Caleb. Say hi, Caleb.
Hi, Caleb.
Okay, funny. I'm also joined today by Jaden. Jaden, how's it going?
Hey, it's going great. I'm cybering all the punks today.
Good. I'm also cybering the punks, so we're not so different, you and I.
Huh?
So today we're just gonna talk about. I mean, this is a rare video where we're gonna talk about kind of our impressions so far. It's a weird thing because I feel like this game has been anticipated for ever since it was announced, and it's the biggest hype train maybe I've ever seen for anything. So we're living in a weird cultural moment right now, and it's cool that all three of us are a part of it and kind of experiencing along with the rest of the world. So I kind of wanted to start out just kind of asking what were your guys' like early impressions, like what were you expecting going into this?
I mean, I think that when the game was first announced, there was that really cool teaser trailer that I think we all saw when that E3 9 years ago at this point, and it was like crazy
9 years ago.
Yeah, it was 9 years ago. And like the robot arm, she has like robot like scythes coming out of her arms. There were guys shooting at her, and honestly, I was picturing like a Mirror's Edge type game, where it's like you're playing as this girl that has robot arms, and you have to like, stop your evil creator from taking over the world or some stupid thing. And I was pleasantly surprised that it was not that. I was like, they're like, no, you're getting a whole open world based on an RPG from the 80s and 90s. And I was like, oh, that's much better. That's much more my speed. So like when I learned that, I was like, oh, there's actually things to do now.
So I guess since then, that was obviously like the initial, because I mean 9 years ago was a long time, but I feel like we really started like, when did Keanu Reeves show up? I feel like that was the moment when like the hype train like left the station. That was what, E3 2019?
That was E3 2019. Yeah, that was when it was like he came on, it was all, you're breathtaking.
Yeah. So between kind of then and last week, a week ago today, how did your expectations change? And then I guess I'll let Caleb go also after this, but like, from that moment, we got open world game obviously, but like, I think some people were under the impression that this was going to be a game where like your wildest dream was possible, and some people were expecting kind of more of a linear situation. Where did you kind of fall in that spectrum?
Like I said before, the original trailer made me think linear, but then everything came out and was like, hey, no, this is an open world game. And I said, that seems to be like, it seems to make sense for the world that they're setting up, but also it just seemed like a better deal. And I think that in terms of the world, it's beautiful, and it just, I don't think this game would work as a purely linear story, because the beginning part of it is very linear, and then the world opens up, and I was like, oh wow, this is much better.
Yeah, totally. Caleb, what about you? How did your expectations kind of grow and change pre-release?
I think I'm just a sucker for cyberpunk storytelling in general, so I kind of tried to curb my expectations early on. But as someone who really enjoys good open world games, I think I've kind of been spoiled over the years by the RPGs more similar to the type of thing that Larian Studios puts out, where
for those who don't know, what kind of games are those?
Divinity Original Sin. They're the ones making Baldur's Gate 3 right now, and so I was kind of expecting a heavy emphasis on narrative decision making, and I think I was expecting something that was, I guess, both a little bit more compact and a little bit more like packed together than a lot of similar RPGs that we've gotten more recently are, because that's also been my understanding of what The Witcher did well. Is part of the reason that The Witcher was as good as it was is that it didn't fill its world with repeated fluff. It filled its world with stories, and it just kept writing and kept working and just kind of put the elbow grease in to create this massive world that just focused on its detail. And so I was expecting something cut a little bit from that cloth, and I think, like I said, I think we can get to more my thoughts on what we ultimately got later, but
yeah, totally, and I definitely want to get back to that too. But just quickly, my kind of like my background in this essentially was the second I saw Keanu Reeves walk on stage that fateful day, I basically said, I'm not.
A beautiful moment.
Yeah, I'm not going to pay attention to the marketing. I'm not going to pay attention to teasers. I'm not going to look anything up about this game. I don't know how I had the patience to do this, but I just decided then and there, I'm just going to wait till it comes out and play it on release day with my mind as untainted as possible. Of course, you know, their marketing blitz didn't allow that to happen, because everything I watched on TV, Keanu Reeves would, show up out of nowhere and be like, hey, what is a criminal? You know?
Let's burn the city, kid.
Yeah, exactly. So basically, I came into this having absolutely no idea what to expect. I just knew it was going to be an open world Cyberpunk game. And that was it. So, yeah. Various expectations here. Definitely what I expected. So really quickly, before we kind of dive in, and Caleb, I definitely have a very pointed question for you. I just really quickly wanted to address that we are definitely aware of the controversies in this game, mainly in its marketing. We can actually get into that a little bit later, too, if we want to, about how I think a lot of people were afraid that the questionable marketing of this game at times might bleed into the game itself. Mm-hmm. Personally, I didn't necessarily see much of that. Obviously, there's still the entire game, and one quest is enough to, set alarms off in people's heads. But I definitely just wanted to, take a second and acknowledge that the controversy is there and that it's not something to be ignored or even taken lightly.
No, not at all.
But at the same time, this is, like I said, it's a big kind of cultural event and moment, and I think we're talking about it, more so in that context, with the nuance that it's not all good. So, with that being said, Caleb, I kind of want to throw this to you and ask the question. You made the point that you thought that this would be similar to The Witcher 3 and kind of their building of a very intricate and detailed world, and how this may or may not have met those expectations. Because to me, I would say it's very similar to The Witcher 3 in a lot of ways, but I'm curious as to what your opinion is on that.
So my ability to actually make comparisons to The Witcher 3 is a little bit more limited, because I know a lot about The Witcher 3.
Caleb, what are you about to say? Are you about to tell me that you've never played The Witcher 3?
I haven't actually played The Witcher 3.
Oh,
I know a lot about
Caleb.
it, but I haven't actually played The Witcher 3.
Well, there's your problem.
But I think, and so like I said, with that, my like lines of what to expect were a little bit more from, I guess, other similar games and what I knew of the Witcher video game that is something that like I said, like I haven't played it, but I've seen significant portions of its gameplay and know a lot about how it plays and functions. I think as far as this game ended up going, I think what struck me with it is just how normal everything in the game felt. Like there isn't anything in the game that other games haven't also done. Like, as much as there wasn't anything that, obviously aside from the technical issues, like there wasn't anything as from a gameplay perspective in this game that I was just like, oh, this is terrible. But at the same time, there wasn't anything that felt fresh to me.
Gotcha. And Jaden, how would you, because you have played The Witcher 3, how would you kind of compare those two kind of while this is like on the table?
So the thing that CD Projekt Red does really, really well is it makes you feel like the world makes sense. I think that like the game the fact that they don't like the thing I hate in all sci-fi shows is when they have to explain to the idiot audience like, you know, this is a thing. Like Star Trek does this a lot where they go like, you know, this is a quantum singularity. Well, what's a quantum singularity? Whereas this game is just like, oh, jack into that monitor. What, you don't know what that fucking means? Well, hold on 2 seconds, you'll see.
Right, totally.
And so it just like the world itself feels like it feels lived in, and it feels rough, and it feels like it, you know, like that the world existed way before I got my hands on it, and it will exist, you know, decades after I put the game down and play something else.
And to an extent, that is true, because they've been building this game for forever. So in a lot of ways,
Exactly.
it kind of is lived in.
Well, and the game itself is based off a tabletop RPG that you know was very popular you know way back when, and so all of the assets were just basically, you know, moved into this new game space, which I don't know how many tabletop RPGs have made the transition to RPG video games, but I think this might be a model that we see repeated with other ones, because this is really cool.
What is it? Fallout was a heavily modified version of GURPS. Baldur's Gate is adapted from D&D. Pathfinder's been in a video game format. Like this is like I would argue the entire CRPG genre arguably takes a lot of influence from tabletop games. And so I think but that isn't necessarily to say that Cyberpunk, like, this isn't a bad thing as far as Cyberpunk taking its influence from tabletop RPGs, but it's more like the idea of tabletop RPGs being an inspiration for video game RPG mechanics has a lot of rich kind of history and pedigree behind it. And I think that is another part of where my anticipation with this game came from. And I think that's part of where the part of me that was expecting something in the flavor of Baldur's Gate came from.
Gotcha. Just kind of mirroring, like, you know, how tabletop games work to how this game would work. Mm-hmm. Just, you know, in its construction and its inception. Interesting. Okay. So I guess my next kind of thought, and this is, you know, moving forward from this, is, so you had obviously these expectations going into, and those expectations may or may not have been met with, you know, obviously there was the first impression of the game, which I think early on, you know, obviously not to spoil anything, but early on in the game, it's pretty widely known that it's a very kind of linear experience, as we mentioned before. Mm-hmm. But then obviously the world opens up. So I think a lot of our first impressions kind of morphed over time. I know they definitely did for me. It wasn't necessarily, this is bad and now it's good, or this is good and now it's bad, but my kind of expectations of what the game even was changed a little bit. So I know Caleb and you and I talked a little bit right when we started, you know, about our impressions of the game. But I guess my question for both of you is, how did those impressions change from, you know, a week ago when we were first starting out and, you know, wide-eyed and bushy-tailed, to now when we've all probably put a decent amount of hours into this game?
I think go ahead, Caleb.
I think to kind of speak for myself or to my own experience, I think my take on the game started out primarily negative and became a little bit more positive as time has gone on. And I think the more I've played the game, the more it's kind of fallen into a neutral space. I will give the game the accolade of playing Cyberpunk is more fun than not playing a video game.
Wow.
But
that sounds bad.
But I guess my anticipation with it, though, is that what the game was advertising itself to be, and this isn't even my own expectations based off of necessarily Larian, but what CD Projekt Red was outright claiming this game was going to be, is very clearly not what it was, even with the technical issues aside.
So let's dig into that for a second. Because as someone who didn't pay attention to the marketing, I have absolutely no idea what promises were made. To me, I was like, this is probably going to be some No Man's Sky situation where they promise a million things and deliver on almost none of them. So if I don't expect all these things, I'll go into it not being disappointed. Kind of a cynical attitude looking back. But
Yeah.
I'm really curious from both of you what those promises were and how you feel they didn't deliver on them or did.
I think No Man's Sky is a very similar comparison. I think the biggest thing is that one of the trends that I've been seeing a lot in kind of Western RPGs developing over time is this developing this sense and feeling of your decisions affecting the tone of the story. That if you want to play a heroic, like, hug all the animals, nice person, you can. If you want to play a, like, jackass bastard who's just in this for the money, you can. Like,
Twirly
Fallout.
madman.
And so I think Cyberpunk was very much promising to be an evolution of that specific part of the RPG experience. The idea of your personality, your expression, your identity, the way that you personally, as a player, want to interact with a cyberpunk world, you're able to do so. And even with the life paths. So if you want to play as an outsider to the cyberpunk world, if you want to play as someone who started on the ground floor of it, or if you want to play as one of the privileged few within it, it was kind of this idea of you can interact with a cyberpunk aesthetic and world in the way that most excites you personally about it, and kind of make those decisions. And I think the linear parts of the game took away from that, but I also think what I've experienced, because I have started to fall into the more open world second act of the game, I think the second act of the game kind of also falls away a little bit from that, more in a sense of it does fall back into it falls back into the kind of Witcher experience of you are a character in a story, but that isn't what Cyberpunk as a game was always advertised to be. It was always, you're the one who creates this character, and you're the one who determines what they ultimately become. Whereas it feels like V, even in the second act of the game, where your own gameplay decisions and how you explore is left more open, who V is, as far as his or her personality, isn't really to interpretation. And I think my very first playthrough of the game, I was expecting, like, oh, I'm going to go the corpo route, but I'm going to play, like, constant moral high ground, so I'm going to be in this position of, like, you know, trying to watch out for me and my own in this, like, impossibly immoral world surrounded by, like, people who would backstab me, and relying on my wits to kind of keep me and my friends alive is kind of what I was expecting, as far as, like, oh, I'm going to be given these moral choices and I'm allowed to pick what my starting spot is. That isn't at all what it ended up turning into. And I think that even if what it was isn't necessarily bad, like, there's no mistaking that the way the game was advertised early on was very much, you're the one who gets to decide what V is. And that isn't what we have.
Right. I mean, Jaden, do you have a similar impression, just based on kind of what they advertised?
Absolutely. I think that anytime an RPG is announced or talked about, they always seem to say, you're in the driver's seat, you're in control, you can do whatever you want. And that is true in the game to a point, because Caleb's absolutely right. Like, it turns out that after the linear story goes on, outside of a couple of dialogue options, you don't really get any major benefits or detractions from what life path you choose. Like, I was kind of expecting, like, if I was a nomad, then I'd be an outsider, and, no one would trust me because they hadn't heard of me. And if I played a corpo, they'd be like, oh, yes, V, we met you at the convention last year. I hear you're killing corporations now. But none of that happened. And I think that was a little disappointing. But at the same time, once I got my head around the idea that this was a linear-ish story where, like, V's changes sort of, his choices sort of, his or her choices sort of affect the world, but don't, I liked it a little bit better because it was like open world to a point, or like my choices matter to a point, but there's still a story that has to be told along the way. And that's when I was like, oh, okay, well, let me get into this story. And then once I got into the story, I really enjoyed the story.
Totally. So Caleb, let me swing it back to you a little bit here. It sounds like Jaden kind of, once his expectations were changed, he had a more, favorable view of it. As where Caleb, you said you went from being disappointed to being approving of it to being now saying, well, it's better than doing nothing. So I guess what for you, kind of tanked the rating?
I think I think it comes, I guess, down to a lot of personal taste, I guess. I think CD Projekt Red, I think, could have saved themselves a lot of this entire controversy, literally, if they just advertised more on what the game actually was and didn't focus on these lofty promises. I don't think what the game is bad. I just think that it is a very specific type of experience that some people are going to be more interested in than others, and isn't actually trying to be groundbreaking. I think if CD Projekt Red was just, we're making a video game adaptation of the Cyberpunk tabletop role-playing game, and literally left it at that, didn't try to go with, we're trying to push the boundaries of how narrative choice affects RPGs, didn't try to go with, we want to be a historic, turning point in the history of RPGs, we're adapting a fun tabletop role-playing game. I think people would have, they could have avoided this whole thing, because the game that we got, technical issues that are capable of being fixed aside, it's not bad. It just isn't as ambitious as I expected. And so I think that's kind of where my neutrality has kind of come in, is that once I kind of wrapped my head more around, okay, this is what the game is actually trying to be, any take I have at that point on was always just personal taste, what I want from a video game. So any places where I'm like, I would have preferred to have more choice in this moment, is 100% a personal taste thing. Any point where I can say, any point where I can say, oh, this is something that I wish they had more of, is again 100% my own preference. And so I don't really feel comfortable saying, oh, this is a bad game, because I wanted the ability to play as a morally complicated corpo. If that's not what the game was going for, then it's not a fault within the game.
I think Keegan said it best earlier when he said, I've been burned before by No Man's Sky. That's just where I'm at this point. Anytime someone promises me that this something will be in a game, I don't believe them until I have the game in my hand. I've just decided to not, I'm like, oh wow, I know they say don't judge a book by its cover, but I'm like, oh cool, sci-fi world with ninja swords. Let's try it. Let's see how it goes. But beyond that, I'm like, I'm not gonna, they're like, if they're like, oh, you can change the color of your house to be this color, I'm not gonna believe you until I can see me actually do it.
Right, totally. And Caleb, I think you bring up an interesting kind of philosophical question about open world RPGs, and it definitely, I definitely understand your opinion of, I think something that RPGs, MMORPGs of all kinds have been promising for a long time is making your decisions matter and making, the butterfly effect kind of a real-time simulation where every decision you make has some kind of impact on the story at large. And I definitely think there's a school of thought where that is a more rewarding experience because it truly gives, the player a maximum amount of agency to say, you decide how the story goes, beyond something that's already been done before. Like you said, in Divinity Original Sin, or at a very basic level, you can look at the, it was a Batman, they did Batman, they did Game of Thrones, and they did...
Telltale.
Telltale, yeah. Telltale does it, on a very, very small level where there's a small amount of tracks. So I guess that's one school of thought, but the CD Projekt Red way, just as far as, Witcher 1, 2, 3, and now this game, is to So the crux of the issue obviously is if you did want to go that way and create a narrative that can branch a believable number of times. We obviously aren't going to say it could branch infinitely because that's just never going to happen. You're never going to create a game that perfectly recreates like the chaos of actual life and those decisions.
That's not true. Minecraft exists.
I mean, yeah, that is true, but also Minecraft doesn't necessarily have like a story and voice acting that you have to worry about. The one of the big issues is it's just if you make a game that big, just writing wise, it literally becomes a logarithmic increase in the amount of work you have to do once you get to a certain point. Because, after when there's one branch in the road, okay, now you have to write 2 stories, but then those branch and then you have to write 4 stories. And all of a sudden you're at like 1 million stories you have to write and it becomes not feasible. And then you have to voice act those and all of that. So there's a human limit to how much, until we have like machine learning being able to do some of this stuff for us, there's a human limit to how much we can feasibly, branch and create quote unquote meaningful stories like that. But I do think that like you said, that moment is still coming. I don't think that it's, outlandish. I think that RPGs will be forever changed when we can start to see that happen. But, and just to conclude my rambling ass point here, CD Projekt Red is very much the opposite when they approach their RPGs, right? They like to focus on one character, usually in The Witcher it was Geralt, and tell that character's story and let you play it in the way that you want to play it. So Cyberpunk is very much the story of V and his or her exploits. I personally favor her because I think the voice actor is way better. But essentially the benefit you get of this is you get a much more focused story where all of the writing and all of the, man and woman power of developing the game can be focused into treating that one story with as much, nuance and with as much, attention that they did for Geralt's story in The Witcher 3. And I think that is where this game really shines. I think this is maybe the first open world, quote unquote, nameless protagonist that I really, really actually identified with. And I think that they essentially just made The Witcher 3 in the future in a lot of ways. And I think they're knocking it out of the park based on those expectations.
Mm-hmm.
I would agree with you on that. The main character, just so cool. I like I know you're going with the female character, but I'm playing as the male V, and I just like him. I don't know why. I'm just like, oh, this is cool. This is a fun character, and it's believable.
And I think something that they did, I'm still trying to pick apart the ways that they made me interact with this game, because this is something that I've said before, is that in RPGs, I used to be just a main quest guy. Like side quests, I was like, it's just going to be a fetch quest. It's just so this person gets an extra cutscene at the end. Yep. Like Mass Effect, I was just like, I was really upset when all of my people died in the end of I think the first Mass Effect, and Abu was second. And Abu was like, why didn't you do any of their side quests? And I was like, because it didn't matter. The world was at stake. But here they kind of, I don't know, I find myself, reading manuscripts and doing all the things RPGs want you to do that I never did before, like doing side quests. And I'm like straight up trying to be a completionist on this game just because it's fun. And
Which is so funny because your character literally does not have the time to do these side quests.
Exactly.
And so Johnny Silverhand keeps telling me that, and it's so funny.
It's
why
so
the
true.
fuck are we here? And I'm like, I have to do this. Judy needs my help.
Yeah, exactly. But I think one of the things that they did to kind of help you, live in V's shoes is they gave you a lot of choice on how to play V. Like an example is, for those who don't know, I don't drink at all. And they give you the option to not drink as V. And a lot of games, they just kind of force you to drink if you want to. And it's like, it's never a huge deal. It's like, whatever, I'm not playing this person. But they let you make those small choices and kind of bring the minutia of your own character into V's skin. And for me, it's really helped immerse me because I'm able to play the game as Keegan as V, instead of, okay, I have to put myself in Geralt's shoes and think about what Geralt wants. Instead, it's like, okay, I can kind of change how V thinks and how V approaches problems. And that has, for me, has been extremely rewarding and has done wonders to immerse me in this game in a character that technically isn't me, if that makes sense.
It is very cool where it's like, kind of like Commander Shepard, where it's like, this is your version of Commander Shepard.
Yes.
This is who you think Shepard is, whereas maybe I think Shepard is a different person.
Mm-hmm.
Like my V drinks all the time. My V drinks way too much.
Yeah, I think there's definitely an interesting aspect to it, and I think what it really comes down to is these realizations of like, you can go the Divinity Original Sin 2 route of having millions and upon millions of different choices written and having like God knows how many different story paths that just all lead to similar like common points kind of within. But I think that the choice that devs kind of make when they design a lot of these RPGs, and I think Telltale was kind of a master of this, is learning to measure what the individual decisions the player is going to want to make, as opposed to necessarily planning every possible path. So my strategy whenever I played a Telltale game is I would always, always, always choose a favorite character, like other than the main character, as early as possible. And as soon as I chose a favorite, like, supporting character, instead of trying to choose the moral or immoral route, because Telltale rarely makes it as simple as, like, this is the high karma and the low karma story, I would almost always just choose a favorite character and always make decisions that favored that character. So in Telltale, in Walking Dead, for instance, like it would always be Clementine, or in like later seasons, I would pick, when I was playing as Clementine, I would pick another favorite character in the world and exclusively make decisions that benefited that character. The result was usually that I got more time with that supporting character, which is usually, or with that faction, which is usually the thing that I made those decisions hoping to have. But, and I think Fallout was a master of that. Fallout was, when it comes down to it, an ultimately very linear game. But the reason that I think Fallout is one of the, or at least Fallout 4 is one of the better open world games that I've personally played, and one of the few that I've played to completion.
You're talking about Fallout 4, right?
Yeah, Fallout 4.
Gotcha.
That I've played to completion multiple times is because the choices and factions that you make actually do affect like what characters you get to see more of. So you can choose a favorite character in Fallout 4, have them as your companion, and they actually interact with the story as you travel with them. I think I've come to suspect, I think I'm going to get more of that in Act 2 once I started playing it more. But I didn't get a lot of opportunities to make those decisions in Act 1. I wasn't able to choose, oh my gosh, I really like this character that they just introduced. Like, I'm going to talk to them more and see if there's something that I can do to make them more of a major character in the story. Or
Caleb, you're blowing my mind right now, Caleb, because all I'm thinking of is if I had applied your logic in the opposite route, I would have never had to talk to Preston Garvey ever again.
Oh my
He still
god.
sends me text messages, hey, there's a settlement that needs your help. I haven't played you in 3 years.
No, but Caleb, I do think that's interesting because I think what the major, I guess, benefit of telling a story that doesn't have multiple options or multiple endings is you create an opportunity to tell a story that is more meaningful, I would say. And I would argue this because when you tell a story in any format, obviously the most like fundamental stories are stories of personal change, you know, Odysseus doing XYZ, or maybe if we can bring this back to another CD Projekt Red's games, the last Witcher expansion, Blood and Wine, right? Yeah. Blood and Wine was, you know, a game that was about Geralt learning how to settle down and learning how to, you know, just be a person again and not necessarily have to live his whole life slaying monsters. And all of his choices in that game helped benefit that one theme. And the issue you run into if you're trying to tell these kind of like meaningful, sort of more traditional stories that have, you know, a meaning or a purpose behind them, is if your character makes a choice that doesn't make sense for that theme at the end, you've kind of ruined the story, you know? It's like, what if Simba never went back to Pride Rock because he instead decided to become king of the hyenas? And then it's like, well, then the story just doesn't work anymore. Like, yeah, it's a cool, interesting, different route that things could have taken, but also the poetry of the storytelling is gone because the whole point is for Simba to return to Pride Rock and, you know, become the king. So I guess, and obviously we don't know how this game ends, and we don't know if V is going to have, you know, this kind of comeuppance the same way Geralt did, and if this story is going to be meaningful the way a lot of the stories in The Witcher 3 and its expansions were. So I guess we don't know yet, but I think if you kind of look at this game more in that sort of framing, I think you'll find a lot more enjoyment out of it, as opposed to something that's going to reward any choices that you make beyond like the superficial.
And yeah, and that's, you know, part of the reason why, like, even though like we do have this conversation where I don't doubt that, like, I think once I get a little bit more into the groove and I feel like I've adapted my understanding of what the game is to a more accurate expectation, I think I'm going to be enjoying this game probably a lot more. But I think at the same time, there is also an acute awareness that the things that I'm actively not enjoying, at least from a gameplay or narrative perspective, are things that are so incredibly subjective.
I think that's a fair assumption.
Yeah, and I mean, it definitely makes sense. And obviously, like, not everything is everyone's cup of tea per se. Like, I think Grand Theft Auto is maybe like one extreme of this, where like you have no choice. Like, you literally just play what the characters did, and it's the same every time, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. I very much enjoyed that game because it was the narrative was so tight and focused, and me wandering around or doing side quests, like that would have taken away from the story they were trying to tell. So I definitely appreciated that, and obviously I'm going to be looking ahead to see how well they're able to execute this and how, you know, what the story ends up being. Because I think Caleb, if we get to the end and they try and pull some like multiple endings based on your choices and it doesn't feel earned, I think I'm going to be a little bit disappointed. I kind of just want a straight ending out of this, because I feel like the choices that I've made have all kind of been the only choice to make. And if that's the case, I expect the story to be told with that in mind, and them not to just tack on like these arbitrary decisions you made change the ending.
Choose, Spider-Man, V, which one will you save?
100%, yes.
The love of your life or this car full of orphans?
I think I think my kind of response to that also, though, and is that if ultimately what CD Projekt Red is trying to do with this game is tell a story with a theme and an ending, I think there's also something to be said about, again, a lot of this controversy could have been avoided with more honest advertising. Because
totally.
What you described is literally what BioShock ultimately is, and BioShock is pretty universal acclaim. I think, honestly, if this game tried to take a little bit less from Fallout and Larian and I think Elder Scrolls playbook, and was less trying to feel like the next level of Elder Scrolls, and was more trying to push for, this is the next level of BioShock. This is going to be a linear story where you get to choose your own, you know, story abilities and get a lot of options gameplay wise, but we've focused on your gameplay options over your story options. Like, this is ultimately going to be the BioShock experience, or even the Borderlands experience, rather than the Elder Scrolls experience. I think, actually, now that I say that, I think Borderlands is actually a really excellent comparison. I think Borderlands is one of my favorite games, because the gameplay-wise, it's very, very open, but story-wise, it's very, very linear. And I think Borderlands is an excellent comparison to, I think, what this game ended up turning into, but that was despite the fact that that isn't what it was claiming to be in its advertising, and that isn't what it was trying to set up its expectations to be.
So let's use that as a jumping off point then, and just talk about how, you know, we've talked about how our expectations maybe weren't met, but maybe if we are using the model of, let's say, Borderlands to say, you know, how is this the next step forward? What things about this game impressed you, and what things about this game exceeded maybe expectations that you had?
I think for me, one of the big things was, you know, I kind of got the impression towards the end of its advertising that it was going to be a, you know, Grand Theft Auto 5 type world where it's huge and it's a big city and you can drive around and, you know, it's going to look, I thought it was going to look good, but then when I started playing it, it looked really good. Like, I think that the textures and the world and the aesthetic that they've set up are amazing. I love the little details, like the concrete barricades all have little LED screens on them. And like the floors, you know, the crosswalks have they're all LED and they're neon. I just think that's so cool. Like the world feels lived in, and I think that's what I, you know, I expected that to feel that way, but I didn't think I would like accept it as quickly as I did. Where I was like, wow, this is what the world would look like here.
Yeah, and you can also tell that no two parts of this game are copy and pasted. Like every section of every hallway is a little bit different and has its own personality. And I've yet to run into something that I was like, oh, they reused this asset from somewhere else. It's like, no, every place has its own different original thing. And like, yeah, they're doing a little bit of trickery there, you know, like reskinning some stuff maybe, but they're able to iterate it on it so well that it's like every single place feels unique. Every cross street has its own personality, just like a real
there's
city.
Different levels of trash in every section that I go to. There's always trash, but there's smaller amounts in certain spots.
Yeah, totally.
I think I've seen, like, to your point, Keegan, I think I've only seen like one asset duplicated. It was like a giant pile of graffiti in a hallway was the same thing in a room later on in that same building. And I was like, that was me after, like, I'd say 20 hours in. That was the first time I'd seen that. I'm like, that's impressive. When you see the sheer scope and scale of this world, you're right. Like, they don't skimp on it.
Yeah, totally. Caleb, you want to say something?
I think I'm trying to think of how best to kind of word my thoughts with it. I think the thing that kind of impressed me the most is the performances from it, if that makes sense. And as much as I think anyone playing on a last gen console may not be able to experience this necessarily or relate,
we'll get there.
But the facial expressions and motion capture or animation performances of the characters just feels very like a lot of effort was putting into making their expressions feel natural and real. And then on the flip side, the voice acting of the game like also feels like very natural and real. I think where it comes down to, though, like, and I like, this is gonna turn back into a little bit of a criticism, but only a little bit. A little bit is that I think it goes back to, I think this game would have benefited a lot from going more for an intentionally linear BioShock experience and letting itself lean into that, because the fact that that's what the game did well, I'm trying to imagine like how good the game could have then been if that was the intentional point and the thing that everything was given to from the like absolute get-go. Like if this game was functionally not an open world RPG but Cyberpunk BioShock, I think that's just System Shock.
Yeah,
I think Caleb, I think what you're trying to say is basically like the game feels like a halfway point between BioShock or Witcher. It just feels like it's right there and it's close to being. Mm-hmm. It could be either one of those very easily, but they just pick this middle option.
Mm-hmm. And that's the thing is it has a lot of this. It doesn't feel like it's a BioShock game because there's so much in it. There's
right.
Too much there.
It's not a series of connected hallways like most.
Yeah.
Linear.
Yeah.
I don't need to collect a certain amount of tokens to get to the new area.
Right,
yeah.
Exactly.
And that's the thing. Whereas at the same time, considering the fact that it's open world, it isn't open decision. And I think there,
like Grand Theft Auto.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And I actually wonder, bringing up Grand Theft Auto, they had obviously after the release of Grand Theft Auto 5, Grand Theft Auto Online came out, and that kind of more seemed to tailor to. Granted, I didn't play very much of it, but that definitely tailored more to. We built this world. Now you can be anyone inside this world and do literally whatever you want and make your own choices. And all of the kind of missions in Grand Theft Auto Online, from what I played, definitely felt like more in that vein of like choose your own adventure in this world that we already built. And I wonder if they won't do anything like that with Cyberpunk, because they put so much effort into building this city. I would use the hell out of it with DLCs and, you know, spin-off games and stuff like that. Just a thought.
They have revealed that there's eventually going to be some type of multiplayer co-op.
Yes. But whether it's like you and I, Keegan, want, where it's like the open world, do whatever the hell you want, or if it's like, hey, now you can play the same missions with your friends.
Right.
Which, if it's that option, I'll be disappointed. Not gonna
lie. My suspicion is that it's going to be, you know, kind of more the there's going to be an ultra specific example, but I'm almost picturing something like the multiplayer mode in the Wii version of Force Unleashed, where it's just going to be like this incredibly single specific half-assed versus mode that is literally there mostly for the sake of saying this can be a multiplayer game, but clearly isn't what any other part of the game was designed to do.
That weird Mortal Kombat Fight 'em game that they had.
Yeah, like you remember that weird combat game that they had in the Wii version of Force Unleashed. Like,
it was great. That was fun, but it was not. It was not anything what they were like describing when they said multiplayer.
Yeah, like that's the thing. It's fun, but it's fun for 15 minutes. Once you realize that you play one of the characters that focuses a lot on Force Lightning, and then Force Lightning is literally just hold down button to win game. Like, there's really no moving around that. It's just like whichever player picks Darth Vader and holds down lightning button wins without any way to get around it. Like,
so just
I hope it's not. I hope it's not that. I really do.
I mean, we'll see. Once again, I'm not going to look at the marketing at all. I mean, maybe I should now that I know what the game is and should know what I'm buying before I buy it. But I guess just to kind of bring it back, for me, weirdly enough, and part of this might be having no expectations and not having watched any trailers or gameplay or whatever. For me, honestly, I haven't been this enthralled or consumed by a game maybe since Skyrim in 2011 or 12, whenever that was. And I think
whenever the latest one is released.
Yeah, whenever that was. I definitely, and I'm not sure what it is. I do think part of it is going into it completely blind and being completely blindsided by the most, you know, detailed, visually appealing game I've ever seen. It kind of feels like when you got a new console as a kid and you see the new updated graphics for the first time and all the new things that they can do with the new machine and being like, whoa, video games just took like a new step. That's kind of what it feels like playing this game. Just like the amount of detail, like we were talking about, Jaden, is unprecedented.
It's great. And
the acting is great, like Caleb said, and the animations are great, and it's just everything is so rock solid. It just feels like, to me, the best story-focused open-world game that I've ever played. Like the most polished, the most evolved. It feels like they've taken everything from every other open-world game that's come before it that is, you know, obviously story-based, and we're not talking about Divinity Original Sin type games here, and just put it on full blast. I mean, they did. They crunched this game for literally a year, probably more. But I mean, the work is there, and we can see it. And to me, every time I load up this game, I'm just completely absorbed in it. So we'll see, you know, as I get more used to it and as I get jaded and as I get to see the cracks, like everyone eventually does with Skyrim and realize it's like the jankiest game ever made. When that happens, I'm sure I'll have a new opinion about it. But for right now, I guess my closing opinion on this game is I'm loving it. I'm having a great time, and I can't wait to see what they do next with this game, be it like expansions or whatever, because I think there's a lot of potential there for way, way more to come. What about you guys? What are your like your thoughts going forward on Cyberpunk?
I'm going to echo what Keegan said on a lot of points there. I think that I've been playing this game and I can't seem to stop playing it. Like, of course there are bugs, there are issues, but the fact that like I have played much more broken games and had a much worse time. The bugs don't, like, this game is just so cool that I don't care about the issues that are, that pop up. I don't care that the beer bottle, phases through the character's hand while I'm talking to them. That doesn't bother me that much because everything else around it is just really cool. And I cannot wait to see what happens, a year from now when all this stuff is fixed and they finally feel brave enough to release DLC. Because I don't think that's going to happen for a while. But I think when the DLC does come, I think it's going to be really, really cool. And whether that be multiplayer, whether that be single player expansions, or maybe they just start throwing in new missions like GTA Online did, where like maybe I have to load up an old save file as V and I just play through a bunch of new quests that they added to the game. Either way, I really like the game. I think it's a lot of fun. Bugs and glitches aside, I think this game has a lot of potential to be to satisfy the naysayers, which a lot of people who are bashing the game are people who haven't bought it anyways. And so I just think that I think it's great. I'm having fun with it.
And Caleb, just for reference, and for reference for anyone listening who hasn't played The Witcher, they came out with 2. I don't think they were technically DLC. They were called expansions. All the DLC for these games are free.
Yeah, they phrased it weird.
Yeah, so they released 2 expansions. They were 2 kind of like story expansions. They were both. I don't remember what the hour count was, Jaden, but it was a lot. They felt like they were at least 8 hours each.
Yeah.
And
that's what CD Projekt Red does too, is that they don't skimp when they give you. The reason they don't call them DLCs because they're like, no, this is just a whole. This could arguably be a whole new game.
Yeah, it's essentially the expansions, and I assume it's going to be the same for this. Is what it sounds like. Is they're going to be new additional stories, maybe following V, maybe not, but new full games taking place in this world. That's kind of like what the expectation is for, when we're talking about the expansions whenever they come for this game. So just to have that in mind, Caleb. But Caleb, I also obviously want to hear your thoughts and hopes and dreams and concerns as you continue playing through this game.
I think the 2 aspects of this is that, like, as much as I'm taking my own cynicism with a grain of salt. So, and that's the thing where I'm there. Every single negative thing that I've thought about this game, I haven't played far enough in for the game to be incapable of proving me wrong. And, even then that's ignoring its own subjectivity. I think where my interest lies is I think we've compared this game to a lot of other games. I think in this whole conversation, I think the most interesting comparison, and I think a conversation that I would love to have with other people if you guys ever get an opportunity to play this game, is at least the early access of Baldur's Gate 3. Which, I mean, obviously because it's an alpha, it's very buggy. But because it's an alpha, it's very buggy. But that's kind of what you're going to expect when you play something on early access. But at the same time, I think Baldur's Gate 3 made very similar marketing promises to what Cyberpunk did, and I think the way that Baldur's Gate succeeds and fails compared to the way that Cyberpunk succeeds and fails, there's a lot of interesting conversation to be had. And so if you guys ever have an opportunity to play that game, either while it's in early access or if it ever comes, or not, I say if it ever comes out, when it comes out of early access, I think that's going to be a really interesting comparison.
I actually think Abu might have played that, so maybe I wanted to have him on at some point to talk about this game, so I know he's got a lot of really good opinions about it. So yeah, maybe we'll plan on doing another one of these, kind of a post-mortem, and just kind of keep probing our feelings as they evolve, because obviously this is a big game, and it's hard to play it for 20 hours and really get a grasp on what it is until it's all over. So yeah. Anyway,
I think this game will look way different 6 months from now.
Oh, absolutely. Well, thank you guys so much for coming onto this podcast with me. I just said podcast. I don't know what this is. It's a Carpe Ludos Live, this broadcast, I guess.
Broadcast.
Thanks for coming to this experience.
Yeah, this
There you go.
experience. I that's what marketing people call things that they don't know how to describe. They call it
Absolutely.
experience.
I went to college. I'm not bullshit.
Exactly. All right, well, thank you so much for coming out and talking about Cyberpunk. I know we're all probably going to go and play it pretty soon after this. Just talking about it gets me excited. Now I've got to edit this video really quick. But thanks for coming on. We obviously have a lot of fun Carpe Ludos content coming in the future. A Minecraft show is in the works, I promise. We'll get there. It's 2020. Give us a break. Yeah, Caleb, Jaden, thank you guys so much for coming on.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
That's it. Just thank you. All right, just thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Don't forget to feed and water the Cyberpunk twice a day.
Exactly. All right.
Thanks for having me on this great show.
Thanks, Caleb.
I know Cyberpunk is fun, kids, but remember, food and water is also fun. It's way more punk to be fully hydrated after playing the game for 40 hours straight.
Say hi to your families. This is also me trying to cross the border, and I get wrecked immediately.
Oh my god.
Yep. So don't cross the border, kids. That's the other lesson here. All right. Thank you, everyone. Have a good night.